They say stories are meant to end, but what if the story refuses to die? Every word he writes brings the nightmare closer. Every sentence rewrites reality itself. And you're about to step into his pages. Alan Wake 2 begins not with clarity, but with distortion. A mirror world where stories fold inward and the act of creation itself becomes a curse. From its first moments, Remedy Entertainment constructs not merely a sequel, but a recursive nightmare, a self-aware descent into the machinery of narrative and horror itself. It is not a game about light versus darkness so much as one about authorship versus annihilation, the terror that one's art might trap rather than liberate. Unlike the first game's pulp noir adventure tone, Alan Wake 2 emerges as something slower, heavier, and more hypnotic. It carries the confidence of a studio steeped in cinematic craft, with the courage to blur boundaries between medium. The result is less an action thriller and more of a fever dream in serialized form. A playable psychological horror film projected across parallel worlds. Remedy has refined the language of storytelling in games where light, sound, and interactivity merge into one continuous hallucination. The narrative is split between two protagonists, Saga Anderson, an FBI agent drawn to Bot Falls by a string of ritualistic murders, and Alan Wake, the missing writer whose words seem to infect the world around him. The brilliance of this duality lies in how the player becomes the connective tissue between them. Saga moves through the tangible world forests, motels, damp towns flickering under sodium lamps, while Alan navigates the abstract darkness of the dark place. A metafictional dimension shaped by narrative itself. Between them, the player acts as a witness, investigator, and author. The structure feels like a cinematic crosscut between two films, one a procedural thriller, the other a surrealist horror. Together they form a mirror, each reflecting the other's fears. The first act immerses the player in the tangible dread of the Pacific Northwest. Remedy transforms familiar landscapes, pine forests, lakes, diners, into haunted scenes. Every location feels lived in yet wrong, like something remembered rather than experienced. The world is perpetually damp, asphalt gleams with recent rain, fog curls around headlights, and interiors hum with the melancholic glow of fluorescent bulbs. This environmental storytelling is central to the game's horror. Bright Falls is not merely a setting, but a living echo of collective trauma. You feel the town watching you, whispering through radios and television screens. Saga's investigation unfolds with the procedural rhythm of detective cinema, yet Remedy imbues it with psychological intensity. Her mind plays an inner mental workspace the player can physically enter is insane narrative design. It externalizes cognition, allowing players to piece together clues within a dynamic mindscape. It recalls David Fincher's sterile, methodical thrillers, filtered through the surreal logic of Twin Peaks. Each case board, each deduction deepens the sensation that the world itself is a puzzle designed for you to fail. Yet the more logical Saga becomes, the less stable reality feels. The investigation is a descent into the grammar of horror, the way narrative consumes its investigator. Parallel to Saga's grounded journey, Alan's half of the story plunges fully into metafiction. His dark place is an urban purgatory resembling a dreamlike New York City, perpetually looping through scenes of performance and despair. Here, Remedy abandons conventional realism entirely. Live-action footage blends with rendered environments. Scenes flicker between mediums as if the game itself can't remember what forms it's supposed to take. It's the closest gaming has come to pure cinematic schizophrenia. Alan is trapped within his own story, an artist imprisoned by his need to create meaning. Every page he writes reshapes the world, but also tightens his confinement. This recursive torment is the essence of Alan Wake 2, art as both salvation and damnation. The Dark Place sequences exemplify Remedy's command of cinematic language. Camera movements mimic handheld horror cinema jarring, intimate and off-balance. Lighting shifts dynamically as emotions change, bathing entire rooms in oppressive shadow or sudden blinding light. Sound design amplifies the instability. Footsteps echo in impossible directions, and music swells not with the melody, but with dread. It's a study in audiovisual psychology. The game teaches you to fear not what you see, but the anticipation of what might flicker next. Alan Wake 2 terror emanates from narrative uncertainty. Every element, dialogue, environmental gameplay mechanic undermines your sense of control. Remedy weaponizes ambiguity, creating a constant low-frequency anxiety that persists even in moments of calm. The horror is existential, the realization that you are complicit in a fiction that may be rewriting itself through you. This is the meta-horror, not a gimmick, but a philosophy. The interplay between light and darkness, the defining motif of the series, evolves here into something more abstract. Light no longer merely destroys darkness, it reveals the fragility of perception. Flashlights and spotlights become tools of comprehension, yet also reminders of limitation. What you illuminate, you define. What you define, you trap. The player learns to fear the beam as much as the void beyond it. This dual symbolism mirrors Alan's artistic struggle. The more he writes to understand the darkness, the more it consumes him. Saga's sections, by contrast, ground the cosmic dread in human emotion. Through her, the game explores motherhood, memory, and the burden of rationality. She's the skeptic pulled into a myth she cannot deny. The more she uncovers about the supernatural elements surrounding Bright Falls, the cultist rituals, the disappearances, the whispers about the lake, the more she becomes entangled in its narrative gravity. Yet she remains the emotional anchor of the story, embodying the audience's disbelief. Remedy uses her perspective to contrast Alan's madness with a semblance of reality, allowing players to oscillate between belief and denial. Cinematically, Alan Wake 2 borrows heavily from film noir and psychological horror, but recombines them into something uniquely interactive. Its aesthetic evokes Seven, Mulholland Drive, The Ring, and The Shining, but filtered through a distinctively digital consciousness. The editing style is deliberate, slow pans, lingering close-ups, dissolves that feel like memory lapses. Remedy directs each sequence with filmic precision, yet the interactivity ensures that the tension emerges not from scripted books, but from the player's own curiosity. At the heart of the game lies the notion of dual authorship. Who writes whom? Is Alan writing Saga's story, or is Saga uncovering Alan's fiction? The tension between creator and creation runs through every frame. This is echoed mechanically in how the player navigates between perspectives. By alternating control between Alan and Saga, Remedy makes you inhabit both sides of the mirror, the dreamer and the detective, the writer and the reader. You become the invisible third author whose choices stay an illusion. The result is an unprecedented fusion of narrative and gameplay, horror born from self-awareness. On the surface, it's a supernatural mystery about cults and shadow entities. Beneath that, it's a meta-textual commentary on storytelling as survival. Alan's manuscripts scattered through the game predict events before they happen, a motif carried from the first game but expanded into a commentary on determinism. To read a page is to know your fate, and yet to play is to enact it. Remedy turns prophecy into gameplay, forcing you to experience narrative inevitability as a mechanical tension. The horror is not that monsters lurk in the woods, but that the script has already been written. Sound design further deepens this meta dimension. Voices echo from radios and televisions, often speaking directly to the player. They break the fourth wall while reinforcing theme. Creation as performance. Each song becomes a moment of lucid dreaming when the boundaries between narrative layers briefly align. Few games use music so deliberately, to underscore the psychology of storytelling itself. Visually, Alan Wake 2 is an operatic display of contrast. Remedy's proprietary Northlight engine renders light not merely as illumination, but as a texture particulate, almost tactile. Environments shimmer with hyperreal moisture, every shadow breeze, evoking classical horror imagery while grounding it in modern digital realism. The frame constantly oscillates between claustrophobic interiors and vast, oppressive exteriors. This visual duality mirrors the thematic one: confinement versus exposure, narrative versus chaos. Exploration, on the other hand, becomes an act of interpretation. Remedy fills every environment with cryptic symbols, manuscripts, graffiti, and fragmented lore. Reading and observation are survival skills. The player becomes both detective and literary critic, decoding the logic of a cursed narrative. This meta-engagement transforms typical gameplay loops into acts of thematic resonance. Searching for collectibles become an investigation into meaning itself. The pacing of the story reflects the rhythm of creative obsession. Long stretches of calm investigation, note-taking, wondering give way to bursts of panic and revelation. This ebb and flow mirrors the psychological cycles of artists trapped between inspiration and despair. Alan's journey through the dark place resembles the process of drafting and redrafting, erasing and rewriting in search of coherence. The player participates in this creative torment, forever caught between progress and recursion. What distinguishes Alan Wake 2 from most narrative games is its unwavering commitment to ambiguity. Remedy resists the temptation to explain its mysteries. Every revelation begets more uncertainty, and the truth remains always just out of reach. This withholding is not frustration, but design, a reflection of how horror thrives on incompleteness. To know fully would be to end the nightmare. To not know is to live within. The player becomes addicted to deciphering the undecipherable, mirroring Alan's own compulsive authorship. Symbolically, the game expands its cosmology into something approaching myth. Cauldron Lake becomes a liminal threshold between reality and fiction, a metaphor for the unconscious mind, where ideals gestate and devour. The dark presence is less a monster than an embodiment of narrative potential unrestrained. It is the blank page's hunger for meaning, the void that demands to be filled. In this sense, Alan Wake 2 is not about fighting evil, but about negotiating with imagination itself. The interplay between reality and fiction also extends to the player. Remedy constantly reminds you of your own complicity. By pressing buttons, making choices, and advancing dialogue, you become the silent co-author enabling the cycle. This game's metafictional gestures, characters aware of being written, environments reacting to narrative shifts, serve as mirrors for interactive storytelling itself. The horror arises from recognizing that the player's agency is an illusion, scripted in advance. You are like Alan, performing within someone else's design. Psychologically, Alan Wake 2 explores isolation, guilt, and creative burnout. Alan's years of imprisonment in the dark place are metaphors for depression and artistic paralysis. His attempts to write his way out reflect the destructive loop of perfectionism, the artist rewriting endlessly to avoid confronting the blank finality of completion. Saga's journey, meanwhile, embodies empathy and the search for the truth amid chaos. Together, their arcs form a dialect of despair and determination, showing how stories can both imprison and heal. Technically, Remedy achieves a rare harmony between narrative tone and mechanical design. The interface itself becomes part of the horror language. The Mind's Place menu suddenly flickers, the manuscript's prophetic entries, the shifting geometry of the dark place. Every system reinforces theme. As the story spirals deeper, the game begins to comment on its own nature as sequel and adaptation. It interrogates the ideal of return. Why do we revisit stories, and what changes when we do? Bright Falls, once the setting of pulpy adventure, now feels aged and haunted by memory both for its characters and its players. Remedy transforms nostalgia into melancholy, suggesting that sequels themselves are ghosts of unfinished narratives. The past cannot be escaped, it can only be rewritten. Throughout, Alan Wake 2 maintains a cinematic rhythm uncommon in games. The editing of scenes, the timing of dialogue, and the choreography. Long takes allow attention to breathe. Sudden cuts puncture reality like shocks of awareness. The absence of a traditional HUD in many moments heightens immersion, as if you're inhabiting a film rather than controlling a game. Remedy demonstrates that interactivity need not disrupt cinematic flow. It can enhance it by making you feel the weight of each frame. Even without revealing its ending, it's clear that Alan Wake 2 positions itself as both continuation and critique of its predecessor. Where the first game celebrated the romantic struggle of the artist, the sequel exposes its horror. Inspiration becomes infection, creativity a form of possession. Remedy deconstructs its own mythology to question the cost of storytelling, the toll exacted on both creator and the audience when fiction becomes reality. In the broader landscape of horror, Alan Wake 2 occupies a rare-filled space between psychological thriller, surrealist art film, and metafictional experiment. It joins works like Silent Hill 2 and Control in exploring subjective horror, the kind that emerges from consciousness itself. Yet its voice is distinct, mournful, literary, and self-reflexive. It is horror as introspection, where the most terrifying monster is the narrative impulse that won't die. Alan Wake 2 stands as one of the most sophisticated examples of interactive cinema to date. It's a meditation on storytelling disguised as a nightmare, a horror experience that derives its terror from recognition rather than shock. The darkness is not evil, it's narrative, potential waiting to be shaped. The void between drafts that every artist must face, and inhabiting Alan and Saga, we confront our own reflection in that void. The need to impose meaning. When the credits eventually roll, the sensation is less of completion than of awakening. From a dream whose details slip away yet linger emotionally, Remedy leaves us with unease, not because the story is unfinished, but because it mirrors the open-ended nature of creation itself. The player steps away uncertain, thoughtful, haunted, and that is precisely the point. In the end, Alan Wake 2 is a mirror held up to the act of storytelling, reflecting both its power and its peril. It is a cinematic horror in its purest sense, not about monsters in the dark, but about the darkness within the storyteller's mind. Remedy has crafted a game that writes itself into the player's subconscious, a recursive loop of fear and fascination. The light may reveal the path ahead, but it also blinds, leaving after images that refuse to fade. And somewhere, beneath the static and the rain, a typewriter continues to click, telling us that the story, like the darkness, is never truly over.